The forgotten kingdom of Cahokia. Long before Washington or Jamestown, a lost civilization ruled the Mississippi and vanished, leaving behind only silent pyramids of earth. Chapter 1. The city that shouldn't have existed. Before Washington, before Jamestown, before even Columbus dared the Atlantic, there was a city in the center of North America, a city so vast, so organized, that it defied everything historians once believed about the ancient past of this continent. When early settlers first wandered across the Mississippi floodplain in the 1800s, they thought they were crossing untouched wilderness. But as they approached what is now East St. Louis, a strange landscape appeared. Not the gentle rolling hills of nature, but a field of perfect earthen mounds, dozens of them, spread across miles. To the farmers and fur traders of that era, the scene made no sense. The largest of these mounds rose 10 stories high, with sides so precise they formed near-perfect angles. Locals called it a monstrous hill. Others whispered it was a fortress or a burial site built by a lost race. That largest mound would later be called Monk's Mound, after French Trappist monks who built a small monastery on its top in the 1700s. But long before the monks, long before European eyes saw the Mississippi Valley, that mound was the center of a civilization, one greater than London or Paris in its time. Archaeologists would name the site Cahokia, after a later tribe that lived nearby. But the Cahokia tribe didn't build it. The true builders were a mysterious people known today as the Mississippians, who thrived there from around 1050 to 1350 CE, centuries before Europeans even knew this continent existed. At its height, Cahokia may have held 40,000 people, making it the largest city north of Mexico. It was a marvel of ancient urban planning, massive earthen pyramids arranged around grand plazas, palisaded walls stretching miles, neighborhoods connected by causeways. And it was no random cluster of huts. The mounds were deliberately aligned to solar and lunar events. Every building, every open space, every sacred circle followed a sacred geometry that tied the city to the heavens. In the heart of Cahokia stood Monk's Mound, an earthen pyramid the size of a modern sports stadium. On its summit rose a huge wooden temple where the city's ruler, the great sun, presided as both king and god. Imagine the scene 1,000 years ago. Drums echo through the night. Torches burn in the plazas. Priests in painted masks climb the steep sides of the pyramid, carrying baskets of offerings, maize, tobacco, shell ornaments, sometimes human captives. To their people, he is not merely human. He is the bridge between the earth and the sky. The city thrived because of faith and because of power. Cahokia's leaders organized massive labor forces, directing tens of thousands to move millions of cubic feet of soil using only baskets and wooden spades. They managed vast farmlands that produced enough corn to feed the growing population. Traders brought copper from the Great Lakes, obsidian from the Rockies, shells from the Gulf, and mica from Appalachia. Every object found in Cahokia's ruins, from the ceremonial pipes to the carved figurines, reflects a civilization rich in symbolism and craftsmanship. This was not a primitive people. They were architects, astronomers, engineers, and philosophers, masters of both the land and the stars. Yet their story remained hidden for centuries. By the time Europeans reached the Mississippi Valley, the city was gone. The mounds stood silent, half reclaimed by grass and forest. No one knew who built them or why. Early explorers imagined lost tribes from Israel, survivors of Atlantis, even Egyptian colonists. The truth that an indigenous American civilization had achieved such complexity on its own was something few of them could accept. Modern archaeology, however, has uncovered a different, more human story, one of ambition, faith, and collapse. By around 1200 CE, Cahokia began to strain under its own success. Population density soared. Food became scarce. The city's great plazas turned into trash pits. The once organized neighborhoods gave way to chaos. Layers of ash found by archaeologists show fires spreading through residential zones. Some were accidental. Long before telescopes and modern calendars, the people of Cahokia looked upward and found meaning in the stars. To them, the heavens were not distant or cold. They were alive, pulsing with divine intention. Every sunrise, every eclipse, every movement of the moon told them what the gods desired. At the center of their city, just north of Monk's Mound, stood something extraordinary. A massive wooden circle built from tall cedar posts, arranged with mathematical precision. Archaeologists call it Woodhenge, for it served the same purpose as England's Stonehenge, though thousands of miles and cultures apart. Each pole aligned with the position of the rising or setting sun during solstices and equinoxes. When the great sun and his priests stood at the central post, the first light of dawn would break exactly through a specific gap, signaling the changing of seasons, the start of planting, the time of harvest, and the sacred days of renewal. To the Cahokians, this wasn't mere astronomy. It was revelation. They believed the gods of the sky controlled life on earth, and that understanding the heavens meant commanding the favor of those gods. The ruler was the chosen mediator, a being part human, part divine, whose sacred fire linked the sky to the soil. The fire that never died. In the upper temple atop Monk's Mound, a fire burned day and night. Fed constantly by priests, it symbolized the life of the city, the heartbeat of the world. If the fire ever went out, the people believed the universe itself would fall into disorder. The flame's smoke rose high into the air, visible for miles across the Mississippi plain. Villages in every direction could see it and knew their king still ruled, the world still balanced, and the gods still listened. But keeping that balance required more than prayer. It demanded blood. The rites of renewal. During great festivals, often at the summer solstice, thousands would gather in the central plaza. Food and drink flowed freely. Drums thundered like storms. The ruler appeared wearing a headdress of copper plates and eagle feathers, shining in the sunlight like fire itself. Then came the sacrifices. Archaeologists uncovered a burial pit known today as Mound 72, one of the most disturbing and revealing discoveries in North American archaeology. Inside lay the remains of nearly 300 people, men, women, and young women in particular, buried in layers. Some were laid carefully with jewelry and ornaments. Others showed signs of violent death, strangled, decapitated, or buried alive. At the very top lay the body of a man, richly adorned, surrounded by offerings of shell beads shaped into the figure of a falcon. He is believed to have been a high priest or ruler, the embodiment of the bird man, Cahokia's most sacred deity, representing the connection between heaven and earth. The sacrifices were not cruelty for cruelty's sake. To the Cahokians, death was exchange, a way to restore cosmic order, to feed the gods who in turn fed the crops, the rivers, and the sun. Life was circular. Giving life meant preserving life. It's easy to judge such rituals now, but in their eyes they were acts of survival. The entire city depended on divine harmony, and if that harmony broke, if the floods came or the crops failed, it meant the gods had turned away. And soon the signs of divine anger began to appear. The sky darkens. Around the early 1200s, something changed in the heavens. Tree ring data and climate evidence suggest a period of violent weather struck the Mississippi Valley. Extreme rains followed by droughts. The once stable river overflowed drowning fields, then retreated, leaving cracked earth behind. For a society so devoted to celestial balance, such chaos was unthinkable. The priests intensified their rituals. New mounds were built for sacrifices. Offerings increased. Yet the disasters continued. The Mississippi shifted course. Crops withered. Plagues followed famine. And in the skies, a terrifying event occurred, one still remembered in the oral histories of tribes descended from the Mississippians. It was a solar eclipse. Imagine the city on that day, tens of thousands watching as the midday sun dimmed and vanished. The sacred fire flickered under a black sky. The priests screamed prayers, beating drums to drive away the shadow. When light finally returned, fear had already rooted in their hearts. Many believed the gods had withdrawn their favor. Others whispered that the priests themselves had failed, that the sacred fire had lost its power. Civil war followed. Archaeological layers from Cahokia's later years show neighborhoods burned intentionally, walls rebuilt in haste, and weapons scattered across once peaceful plazas. The city that had been united by faith was now divided by it. The great sun's palace on Monk's Mound was rebuilt several times in those years, each smaller than before, a quiet symbol of fading authority. The sacred fire still burned, but fewer hands tended it. The silent exodus. By 1300, families began leaving the city. Some went north toward the Great Lakes, others south toward the Gulf, carrying fragments of Cahokia's religion, its symbols, its myths, its memories. When the first American settlers arrived in the Mississippi Valley in the early 1800s, they believed they were the pioneers of a wild and empty frontier. But scattered across the plains east of St. Louis stood dozens of strange earthen formations, mounds that rose from the soil like the backs of sleeping giants. Farmers cursed them because they broke plow blades. Some flattened them to make fields, not realizing they were destroying the remains of temples and tombs. Others mined them for dirt to build roads or house foundations. No one imagined these mounds were the remains of an ancient city. The first skeptics. In 1811, a traveler named Henry Brackenridge passed through the region and was among the first to suspect the truth. He climbed to the top of the largest mound, the one we now call Monk's Mound, and looked out over the landscape. The view stunned him. He saw not one or two mounds, but dozens arranged in geometric patterns across the plain. These must have been the works of a people far advanced in the arts of life, he wrote. But his ideas were dismissed. In the early 19th century, most Americans could not imagine that indigenous peoples had built such a civilization. popular myths claimed the mounds were the work of a lost race, perhaps survivors of Atlantis or the builders of the biblical Tower of Babel. It was easier, perhaps, to imagine ancient foreigners than to accept that the continent's First Nations had once created a city larger than anything colonial America had ever seen. For decades, the mounds remained a curiosity, something to be marveled at, but not understood. The uneasy rediscovery. By the late 19th century, America had begun to rediscover its ancient past. Railroads were spreading across the heartland. Cities like St. Louis and Chicago were booming. Archaeologists, inspired by discoveries in Egypt and Mesopotamia, began looking at the mounds with new eyes. In 1894, the Smithsonian Institution published a landmark report titled Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley. It cataloged thousands of mound sites across the country, but Cahokia stood out as the crown jewel, the largest and most complex of them all. Still, even then, few understood what they were truly looking at. It would take decades of careful excavation before the world began to grasp the scale of Cahokia's lost empire. The digging years. In the 1920s and 1930s, archaeologists began to dig systematically. What they uncovered shocked them. Beneath layers of soil lay entire neighborhoods, remains of houses, tools, pottery, fire pits, and ornaments. Then came the most astonishing discovery, Mound 72. Beneath its surface, they found the remains of a man laying upon a bed of shell beads shaped like a soaring falcon, clearly a figure of enormous spiritual importance. Around him were other burials, 4 men without hands or heads, 50 young women arranged in rows, and more than 200 others in mass graves. The scene revealed the city's dark splendor, ritual sacrifice on a scale no one had imagined possible in prehistoric North America. Yet alongside the violence, they found evidence of profound artistry, beautifully crafted copper plates, stone figurines depicting mythic beings, delicate ornaments made from shells traded across thousands of miles. These were the works of master artisans and engineers, not primitives. Cahokia, the archaeologists realized, had been an organized, stratified society with priests, rulers, laborers, and warriors. It was an urban center in every sense of the word. The shock of the century. By mid-century, as radiocarbon dating developed, scientists began to pinpoint Cahokia's timeline. Its sudden explosion around 1050 CE, its golden age through the 12th century, and its decline after 1300. The pattern was unmistakable: a rapid rise, a century of dominance, and an equally rapid fall. This discovery rewrote the history of America. It proved that complex civilization had existed here long before European contact, and that native cultures were capable of monumental achievements equal to those of ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia. Yet public awareness remained limited. While school children learned of the Mayans and Aztecs, few ever heard of the Mississippians. The city that once dominated North America was almost entirely absent from the nation's memory. Part of that neglect was geographical. Cahokia lay hidden in plain sight, not in some exotic jungle, but beside modern highways, under subdivisions, and near factories. Progress built over the past, literally burying history again. By the 1950s, parts of Cahokia's outer mounds were destroyed to make way for roads and shopping centers. Monk's Mound itself eroded dangerously, its sides scarred by rain and neglect. Only through the efforts of a few dedicated archaeologists and local advocates did preservation finally begin. The Modern Awakening. In 1961, Cahokia was designated a National Historic Landmark. 2 decades later, it became a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the first in the United States devoted to Native American culture. Only then did the world begin to recognize what had truly existed there, Not myth, not mystery, but a city, an empire of soil and spirit. Modern technology has revealed even more. Using LiDAR scanning and ground-penetrating radar, scientists discovered that the ancient city sprawled over nearly 6 square miles and contained more than 120 mounds. The main plaza alone could hold tens of thousands of people. Around it were defensive walls, watchtowers, residential districts, and ceremonial avenues. In short, Cahokia wasn't a village, it was a metropolis, one that rose and fell 1,000 years before the first English colony on the Atlantic coast. The voice of the earth. Today, standing on top of Monk's Mound, one can see the skyline of St. Louis to the west, the modern world rising where the ancient one once stood. The wind moves over the grass, whispering through time. Some archaeologists say Cahokia represents a warning, a civilization that grew too fast, consumed too much, and collapsed under its own weight. Others see it as a triumph, proof that human ingenuity and belief can transform even mud and river silt into a lasting monument. Either way, Cahokia forces us to rethink what it means to be American. The story of this land didn't begin with European ships. It began here, with people who raised pyramids from the soil, mapped the heavens, and ruled a kingdom whose heart still beats beneath our feet. They left no written words, only mounds of earth that refused to disappear. And perhaps that is their message, that memory, like soil, can bury and preserve, and that the past, however forgotten, never truly dies.